Great, welcome.
Thank you.
So my first question, it wasn't until 2009 that Greenlandic people were officially recognized as a separate people under both domestic and international law. Could you expand a little more on what this means for the people of Greenland?
Well, I think being officially recognized means a lot, because one thing is that we have been seeing ourselves as people. Being in an island, having our own language, ethnicity, history, and what have you. Has meant that we have seen ourselves as a people. But now, with the renegotiation of the new Self-Rule Act that came into effect in 2009, and which, explicitly stated that Greenlanders are now recognized as people under international law, with an inherent right of self-determination. That's, that cannot be, I think, underestimated.
Great. And so you mentioned the Home Rule Act. So Greenland's been making strides towards independence, with the Danish Parliament ratifying the Greenland Home Rule Act again in 2009. And I was curious, do you see Greenland pursuing independence? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think if you look at the modern Greenlandic political history, you have the Home Rule Act of '79, where we began this process, this long process of decolonialization, so to speak, by beginning to take over areas of responsibility from Denmark to Greenland. And that was renewed with the Self-Rule Act of 2009, which further complemented that process by also stating that there's a chapter in the very last part of that act that deals with secession. With the the Greenlandic people have now the possibility of secession and becoming independent if they so wish. So it has to be an issue that the people decides on. But going down that road, I think the vast majority of people support the concept of moving towards that path.
Yeah.
But the disagreement is that some people want to go on a faster mode, while others want to take it in a slower. But we still have some issues to work out, because it's not all areas that we have taken over from Denmark to Greenland. And there's also some areas that we will not be able to take over as long as we remain within the kingdom, like issues like defense and foreign affairs. But within those, we still have some, competences, even in foreign affairs, especially. So it's a long process, also dealing with economic sustainability, because right now we receive about $650 million a year, and that also has to be dealt with, and that's where we are, focusing on developing our different sectors where we see possibilities, be it mineral resources, tourism, hydropower in terms of industrial use and others. So, we still we're working towards that, but the question remains, when is other people going to decide?
Got it. So you mentioned foreign affairs, and I think it's noteworthy that you're the first Greenlandic representative at the Danish embassy to both the United States and Canada. What significance does your role have in terms of Greenland and foreign affairs?
If you delve into the Home Rule Act of '79, we had access to opening up representations in Danish diplomatic missions abroad, but only dealing with economic issues or trade issues. But I was actually part of the team that negotiated the Self-Rule Act, the Foreign Affairs chapter, where we were able to expand that concept. So now I deal with issues independently in all these areas that Greenland has taken over competence of. So, and part of that also means that Greenland can negotiate and enter into international agreements with other countries on issues that we have competence of. Of course, I mean, the whole area of foreign affairs is still a joint responsibility, but we have to be involved whenever Greenlandic issues are being discussed, or whenever Greenland has an interest in whatever issue there is.
Got it. Very cool. And then we've been talking a lot in our class about the Arctic Council. And so I know that Denmark officially represents Greenland on the Arctic Council, but Greenland's role in the process is not to be underestimated. Could you tell us a little more about what Greenland's role in Arctic governance is, and if you think it's sufficient?
Yeah, I think it's noteworthy to state that we've been part of the whole process before the Arctic Council came to be.
Okay.
Very actively, and we were active in the negotiations leading up to the creation. And it was actually our premier at that time who signed on behalf of the Kingdom of Denmark, the Ottawa Declaration of 1996. So and we've been leading different ministerial meetings as well as working groups. So because our basic, I think, approach is that, whenever issues of relevance and interest to Greenland are being discussed, we have to be part of those, because our experience with, with colonization has been that, when we're not part of the whole negotiations and discussions on issue of relevance and importance to us, decisions are not sustainable. I mean, whatever good intentions, other powers might have, it can be actually end up in a wrong decision, because I think as stewards are, of our own environment and area, we know, I think we know best what it takes, and what issues have to be discussed, and what decisions. So the basic, as I said, the basic approach is that, if issues of importance to us, those we have to be part of. So it's important to us to continue to stress that and to be present, in whatever fora, Arctic Council or other important forums where Arctic issues are being discussed, that we are also there. But I mean, the challenge is always, we don't. Because we're so few, there will always be limitations, as to what we are able to cover. But you always have to make a decision of what is important and what is not. Because you can't do everything ourselves, but I think it's also a learning experience in trying to find out where it's important to have our voices heard, and to represent our interests directly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned just now that often you said we know best.
Yeah.
And I was curious, what were your thoughts on the role and use of this indigenous knowledge in terms of governments and governance, and sort of what that looks like in Greenland?
Well, I think, as I said, it's from our own experience that we are drawing up, what our opinions and approaches, as well as strategies as to how to deal with different issues. Because, as I said, we have had bad experiences with decisions being taken, several thousand miles away by people who have no direct concept of what they're dealing with. So I think it's I think you have seen a process. Internationally, in the UN, with the indigenous peoples movement, as well as the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, but also in the Arctic, with the permanent participants in the Arctic Council, but also in general, as the Arctic has become, such a hot topic to discuss, that different regions and different indigenous peoples in the Arctic, are saying that, when you discuss Arctic issues, we also have to be present, and that's, I think, very, very important whenever you talk about, be it the Arctic or the indigenous peoples who inhabit those areas, because I think that's also, different people have different agendas when it comes to the Arctic, and we have seen also, agendas from, for example, environmental movements who wants to preserve and only protect the Arctic, for example.
Yeah.
And that's not, how we see the Arctic when you talk about, the people who live there.
Yeah.
So, it's also an educational process, I think, in that sense.
Absolutely.
That we're trying to bring to the table.
Yeah. And how does Greenland see the Arctic?
Well, I think just like anywhere else in the world, I don't think we see it any differently than people in Hawaii, for example.
Yeah.
I think we have lived there for millennia. We been able to survive, and we want to. We want to have the best conditions. Continue improving our living conditions through economic development, and technological advances and what have you. So, so we don't see it as something that has to be only preserved or protected.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, what do you wish people knew about Greenland and its future?
That's a good question, because in my experience, especially in the U.S., there is very little knowledge about Greenland and what it represents. People are sometimes surprised that people are living there. That they only see the white, the white stuff. Mm-hmm. So, but I think especially young people wants to be seen as that they are just as anywhere else, any other young people in the world. They have all the modern technological tablets and what have you, and living in as part of the globalized world, but also while having our own characteristics when it comes to tradition, hunting, fishing, and living off the land.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add that you'd like people to know or hear?
Well, I think even though we are part of the Kingdom of Denmark, I think you have to. It's for us. It is important to point out the subtleties that are important to us, because it's easy to generalize. I think when you know very little, but for me it's important, to continue to do outreach and to hopefully educate people in what it is that Greenland is for and where it's heading, and to see us as as an up-and-coming country and nation, and because that's the process that we are engaged in the long term.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.